Welcome to the Latin MedTech Leaders Podcast, a conversation with leaders who have succeeded or plan to succeed in Latin America. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, etc. Today, our guest is James Reinstein, CEO at Saranas. Hey, James, it's great to have you here today in the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Julio. Great to be with you.
Awesome, James. So tell us about you a little bit, James.
Longtime med tech, med device person. I spent a number of years, almost 20 years at Boston Scientific, working, living in multiple countries, multiple regions throughout the world. Started in a sales position with a division called Meditech. We didn't even know Boston Scientific was the name of the parent company, but so basically Meditech was their peripheral vascular division, so selling angioplasty balloons. Then I moved into a BD role and actually got the corporation involved in interventional oncology. Started that division basically within Boston Scientific. They eventually sold it, but I was then tapped. We had merged with SciMed Life Systems, and SciMed had a very significant portion of their revenue and business were done in international markets. And Boston Scientific, legacy Boston, didn't really have anything going on. So Jim Corbett was leading international at the time, and he started tapping into the divisions and saying, okay, who is willing and able to take on an expat assignment? I had always had an interest and raised my hand. My interest stems from my father-in-law, who ran Codex South America. I lived in Sao Paulo, Brazil for 10 years. And so did a lot of visiting there. And I thought, wow, this expat role could be pretty interesting. But more importantly, I thought if I'm ever going to lead a global med device company, you got to have that on the ground experience. So had to convince my wife to move to Paris, which is where the European headquarters was, and was there for 5 years. And during those 5 years, we acquired about 15 companies.
Oh my God. I mean, amazing.
And I integrated about half of them into the various divisions of Boston Scientific, at least the European organizations, which was a great learning experience, very interesting, and the whole concept of integrating. The last company that I was involved in was Target Therapeutics, a neurovascular company. So did that integration. It was very successful, at least from Europe. And Europe was about 70% of the revenue of Target Therapeutics. So it was a critical integration for the corporation that had just spent $1 billion on them. And so that's what started this whole travel through the expat life. And then I did return to Boston. I was in a meeting, and I was in a role where we were sort of regional support for marketing. So we were called the Intercontinental. Some people call it Emerging Markets, and I ran the marketing for the two divisions: peripheral vascular, neurovascular.
Okay.
And I was in a quarterly business review with Juan Pedro Zemke, who is the VP of Latin America for Boston Scientific, and he was lamenting the woes of the situation he had in Mexico. And I was saying, well, have you thought about this, or did you think about this? And at a certain point, he just kind of got fed up with the kid in the corner kept asking these questions, and he goes, well, why don't you do it? and I looked over at Jeff Goodman and Dan Moore, who are the heading international or intercontinental emerging markets at the time. And I kind of shrugged my shoulders, like, I guess I could try. And 2 weeks later, my wife and I were house hunting in Mexico City.
Oh my
And
God.
she was 7 months pregnant with our second child.
Really?
And we were there before she had we had our second child in Mexico City. So
Oh, nice.
we have I don't know if this is probably a terrible thing to say, but we have a chilanga.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually loved it so much. We had a second child in Mexico City. So I have dos chilangas.
Oh my God. So they have dual citizenship now.
Yeah. We've kept up their
Wow.
passports. They're now 20 and 18, but yeah.
Beautiful. Good for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was just one heck of an experience. It was
Yeah,
my first sort of general management experience. So the way we ran countries back then would be, all functions were autonomous in the country. We had a regulatory, we had a finance department. And once a quarter, my boss would come to town with his team, and it was kind of like a board meeting.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting, and a lot of dynamic business opportunities there. I just had a blast. 5 years we spent,
Oh.
and we had just a great time, and that allowed, or that success led to an offer for me to go run a region in Asia. So I basically, instead of running a country, I ran sort of the area of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea. And because Korea was the largest and most dysfunctional of these countries, it was that's where I lived. We lived in Seoul, Korea, for
Okay.
3 years. And I was on my way to come back and report to Jim Tobin, the CEO of Boston Scientific at the time. But in the interim, I got a call from a guy, Dan Moore, who I'd worked for on and off over the years at Boston. He had just become the CEO of Cyberonics, so a
Mhm.
neurostim company based in Houston.
Yeah.
And that was, it was one where I actually called Tobin and I said, "Look, I'm not going to come. I'm not coming, but I'm going to go down to Houston." Boston Scientific owned 20% of the equity. It was a publicly traded company, and Jim said, "Well, you realize that's not a turnaround. Like, I know you're a turnaround guy, but that's a reclamation." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I got a pretty good, Dan being the honest guy that he is. I said I got a pretty good idea of what we're facing." And it was an interesting. I mean, they had about 100 million in revenue with a good margin. Probably solid 70% gross
Wow.
margin, but had lost $60 million 2 years in a row. So they were good at it. So we came in and basically, we had to. They had a significant number of people on the team, and I was chief commercial officer. I think I had an organization of about 300 people. I took it down to 80 and grew revenue
Sure. That's
18%.
what I imagine. Yeah. You have to streamline the operation.
Well, I mean, you had 5 different customer-facing groups. None of them, not a single one of them, was in charge or responsible for bringing revenue. And I was,
Unbelievable.
so whenever, something went wrong, or it was like, oh, it's
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Everybody blaming each
so
other. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So it was like, okay, well, this is, we weren't splitting atoms. I mean, I didn't have to be that smart, but it was just really good business acumen, and putting in place the right people, getting the right people on the bus, maybe getting rid of a couple buses. But yeah, so I was there for almost 5 years. We took the market cap up from it was about 400 million when I got there, and over 2 billion when I
Oh
left.
my God, James, that's quite
Yeah, it
a
was a great run. It was a
yeah.
great run, and Dan had signed a 4-year agreement, and he was coming up on that, and so the board did a process, and they said, "Yeah, Reinstein, you're going to replace him, but we're going to try to keep him," and they succeeded. So they were able to keep him, and I'm like, "Well, all right, you guys think I'm ready to run one of these things? I want to run one. It's not going to happen at this company." And at the time, I'm in Houston. I said, "Well, it's not going to happen in Houston because there isn't a company."
Yeah.
So that's when I left, went out to the Bay Area and ran Aptus Endosystems. Did that for 3 years until Medtronic bought it, um, and then have kind of been on this CEO run ever since. And but what Aptus was a adjunctive. It was sort of the helical screw, the endo anchor they called it.
Uh-huh.
That was adjunctive to stent grafts
Okay.
for AAA.
Okay.
And when I looked at Saranas, the company I'm running now, which is here in Houston, they finally, and I'm here operating into this incubator where you've got close to 100 companies that are incubating in
Really
they call it the
nice.
Texas Medical Center, the
Oh
TMCX.
yes. Yeah, I've heard about it. Yeah.
Just a really great,
Yeah.
environment, and
Hmm.
a very positive place to work. And so, but when I looked at Saranas, I thought, wow, okay, adjunctive technology, but it's not as expensive as the Aptus product was. It can be adjoined to multiple procedures, not just AAA, but the mechanical circulatory sports, TAVR, and when we get our next generation product, then we're talking about peripheral vascular, neurovascular, all kinds of these vascular disease where bleeding complications do occur. And what we've discovered or proven in a clinical study, we'll do a larger one, is that if the care team, either peri-procedurally or post-procedurally, is aware that there's a bleed beginning. Right now, they basically feel for it or look for the hematoma, and it's almost too late. You're heading into complication land by then. Our device lets you know when you've got about 50 cc of blood that's extra arterial in the tissue, and then all the way up to 200, you're still less than half a unit of blood. So it's phenomenal technology. It works extremely well, 100% sensitivity, and a very high specificity. So it's really, really good technology. And we're just now funded and hiring the team, the sales team. We're going to do a larger clinical study, and it's yeah, really excited about it. We just got funded. Baird Venture Partners led the round, so they'll be a great partner for us going forward.
Excellent, James. I mean, quite a ride, quite a journey, and you've had, and especially the Latin American piece of it. So let's talk about Latin America in a little more details, James. What trends do you see happening in the world or in Latin America, political, economical, social, that are kind of beneficial to our discussion today, or for the business of doing trials or selling devices in the region?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say definitely opportunities for the commercial. There's commercial opportunities and finding the right partners. Most companies like Saranas would not be trying to outfit direct teams, so it's trying to find third party partners, and that's pretty much the norm. In the past, I've done some hybrid versions of that, such as Cyberonics, where we had a small kind of tiger team on the ground that managed the distribution network. And I always thought that that was critically important because you need to have someone on your team that speaks the language, speaks the culture, and is supporting the third parties, or maybe a boot in the tail of the third parties, which sometimes is necessary. But that's but it's really about training, support, and getting providing that to them in the best way possible. And you really need somebody on the ground to do that, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I've seen that trend or that structure happening in the region a lot, and I think that's the ideal way to enter a new market, Asia, Latin America, because distributors come and go, but your people are advancing your agenda. They are helping you generate demand and supporting the work of the distributor, doing co-marketing activities, training the distributor and the new distributors because they don't always stay with you for for as long as you want. So you
Right,
always have
right.
to be looking for new distributors, new ways to expand the coverage in the country. So, for example, in Colombia, Mexico, such large countries, Brazil, you need a few distributors. I mean, more than one, certainly,
Hmm.
to cover the whole
Yeah.
country. So,
Yeah, I mean, even in Mexico, when I went there with Boston Scientific, we were predominantly direct, but we still had a distributor because the process to get into military hospitals or to the EAMS, you really needed a third party to do that, in most instances, most cases. So, but smaller companies like I'm in now, or even Cyberonics, we did that sort of hub and spoke approach. We had a group in Sao Paulo, and then he had one or two of his marketing support people in I think one in Mexico. The larger countries, Brazil for sure. He was in Sao Paulo, so yeah. So I see that. The other area, and this is what we did when I was at Cyberonics, now LivaNova, is initiated manufacturing in Costa Rica. There's a whole center. You've got almost every large company there. But the one thing I did while I was at Boston Scientific, we had about five of these maquiladoras, up on the frontier, on the border towns, and I was the in-country representative. I really didn't have much to do with it, and other than quarterly board meetings, but I never had to physically go, which was interesting. But that was a great opportunity for companies. Obviously NAFTA driven at the time, but we were deciding between Costa Rica and Ireland to put manufacturing, and it really wasn't even close. I mean, I had worked very closely with Boston Scientific's Irish manufacturing in Galway. Then we even opened up another one in Cork, but it really was. It just made so much more sense for Costa Rica to be the destination for that manufacturing plant.
Hmm. Costa Rica is coming up a lot in Colombia because Colombia is now targeting nearshoring, right? You know that term now, where
Yeah.
countries are, where the relationship between the United States and China, has some tension. So companies are looking to nearshore their operations. And Colombia is going after that market. And recently, the government just announced an initiative to bring pharmaceutical and medical device nearshoring to Colombia. And they're looking at Costa Rica as one of the examples of a successful policy, state
Yeah.
policy to attract nearshoring. I mean, such a small country, all you hear is the jungle and the kids from high school going on vacations to Costa Rica. You would never imagine that such a small country has such a strong manufacturing, medical device manufacturing industry, and very sophisticated, by the way. So,
Oh yeah. No, it's I mean, concerted effort on their part to develop it. I don't know when it was, decades ago maybe, but
yeah, yeah,
you go to that region and you've got every, Boston, Stryker, every company seemingly. Abbott has a huge facility there, and they have the infrastructure to support it.
exactly, exactly. So they're doing something right, and Colombia should get inspiration from them. That's certainly something that I see happening in the near future in terms of Colombia or other countries in Latin America. I think countries in Latin America, James, are maturing. They are realizing that exporting coffee and avocados, and in the case of Colombia, cocaine and bad news for Netflix is not going to cut it. They need to diversify and get more complex in what they export, right? Knowledge
Yeah,
is what we need
for
to
sure.
export in the country.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Colombia keeps coming up for me as well for doing clinical trials.
yes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's I guess a couple key centers there. We are going to do a post market study, but just in U.S. centers for Saranas. But I know that there's actually a company here called Procerian. I believe they're doing. They did their initial first in man in Colombia.
Excellent. I'm
Yeah,
happy to hear that. Very good, very
yeah,
good. Yeah, James, you're bringing up a good point. I think, I mean, this is what I do. I do clinical trials, early feasibility clinical trials, and we also help companies sell medical devices in Latin America. And I've seen the regulatory framework of pretty much all countries in Latin America because a lot of my clients first come to me thinking about Brazil or thinking about Argentina or thinking about Mexico. So I have to study the regulatory framework and their environment for clinical research, specifically early stage. And it's not that friendly as compared to Colombia. And Colombia has some good advantages. And one of the advantages is the not only Colombia, all over Latin America, but is the ease of patient recruitment. It's a lot easier to recruit patients because they don't have as many options as patients have in the United States, right? You have 20 other FDA approved options that may delay, or you can do pain management or something that can delay some more drastic intervention. Um, uh, you're not going to subject in the United States yourself to an investigative a device that has not been tested in humans. They just tested a device in a couple of pigs, and you don't want to be the first one, right? At least not in the United States. Whereas in Latin America, unfortunately, patients have delayed access to medical innovations. So
yeah,
if you come with a device that can treat their chronic disease in 15, 20, 30 minutes, they will sign up for it. I mean, immediately. And they also trust the doctor. So if the doctor suggests that you get in the trial, they will take the advice of the doctor. So that's one thing. And another thing is the is cost savings. In the case of Colombia, the Colombian peso, James, has become the third, one of the top three most devalued currencies in the world. So it's really a bargain to buy services from a hospital in Colombia now because is so cheap.
Oh,
so
interesting.
so yeah, so those are kind of the advantages of doing
Are
trials.
they going to move to Bitcoin like El
In Salvador?
Salvador?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
That's kind of a joke.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know why
Good.
they're doing that. I think they're seeking publicity or something. But it's interesting. Not trying something new, at least.
Yeah,
Gotta give
yeah,
them
yeah,
credit.
yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
We'll see.
so James, what do you think about the EUMDR, about that trend happening in Europe and the relationship with Latin America? Do you think that will benefit the region somehow?
Benefit Latin America or
Yeah.
EU?
No, the Latin America. Yeah. More trials, more companies looking at Latin America to start their sales efforts.
Yeah, I mean, you could already see this trend between US, the FDA, and notified bodies in Europe, even leading up to MDR. I mean, it was the notified bodies, I call them, they're like the airlines. They really don't care about you as a customer. And they forget that that's actually the relationship. They're
Interesting.
just, and I've multiple companies that I was helping back when I was consulting were just lamenting, oh, this notified body, that notified body, and it's just amazing. And these are the smaller companies; they're not going to get the Boston Scientific attention.
Sure.
So it's making what was already what I would consider a dubious opportunity to make money commercially in Europe that much more difficult. Now, the other side of the coin is, as a small company like Saranas, we really need to have CE mark.
Sure.
If nothing else, not so much for the commercial benefit, but to be able to say to a potential acquirer,
Acquire. Yeah.
where you already have market access.
Yes, exactly.
And but having FDA is irrelevant to MDR, fortunately or unfortunately. But in some Latin American countries, that it's the benefit. That's kind of all you need. Um, but it's no kind of layup. In as in some countries, it's great. I mean, it's easy access like Chile, but
Chile. Yeah.
Brazil was probably the other extreme. Maybe even Argentina now, I think, has gotten more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mexico is making some effort there, from what I
But
understand.
still, it's a little convoluted. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's too bad that with FDA approval, which isn't as isn't that easy, but actually compared to MDR, it is.
It's a walk in the park.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we were Saranas. Our product was a de novo 510K. We did a clinical study already for 60 patients. I guess it was post market, but it wasn't required for approval. So, but this is a pretty arduous requirements. The tech file
Yeah.
is not necessarily the same tech file you're going to give to the FDA. So I think it could create opportunity for Latin America. But here's the door. The door is open. Are the government's going to react and say, okay, let's figure out a way, least burdensome path approach. And if they do, then certainly opportunities will exist.
Yeah, yeah. I think going back to Colombia, Colombia is poised to benefit from it somehow. Because, by the way, it has the fastest regulatory approval time for a clinical trial and also for a commercial device. If you already have the approval of a reference country being Canada, the United States, Europe, Japan, and Australia, uh, getting INVIMA approval in Colombia is pretty straightforward. By law, the agency has to reply in 90 days, and they do. So it's considered one of the countries with the fastest access
Hmm.
to
So one of the
North America.
questions we were talking earlier about distributors come and
Mhm.
go, right?
Yeah.
So in some countries, the license is held by the third party. In some countries, you can actually, as a company, hold it yourself or appoint it to somebody who isn't the distributor that you need
A
to
registration
potentially
holder. Yeah.
change out. Yeah,
Yeah.
where for me the ideal is company can hold it, but sometimes that's most cases not the case. Where is it an opportunity to have it in a third party? So if you do change out a distributor, it's not another period of time that you're out of the market.
That's an interesting comment you're making here, and going back to Colombia, because it's the only country in Latin America, James, by the way, that allows foreign entities to be the title holder of their registration. You don't have to rely on a local distributor or in a third party registration holder that is also a local company and pay like $300 every month or something like that for
Yeah,
that
yeah,
privilege. So, yeah, that's one of the benefits of Colombia, without mentioning the fact that healthcare is a constitutional right. So you get reimbursement, pretty much guaranteed in the system, which is European style, kind of universal coverage. Everything is covered, kind of easy access to the system from the patient standpoint. And if they don't get you the device or the diapers that you need or the medicine that you need, you can go all the way up to the Supreme Court and get your
yeah.
right respected, and they get you
Are there
what
a
you
lot
need.
of are there a lot of diaper cases heading to the Supreme Court?
Imagine. There's a case of a lady that this is an actual case. I'm not joking. There's a lady who went through a procedure, James, and it's a famous case in Colombia that exemplifies my point. And she couldn't go up to the second story in her house, so she needed an elevator, and she went all the way up to the Supreme Court to get that elevator
Wow.
in her
Wow.
house. So yeah, that's the way it is.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, but going back to your point, that little things like that, like you as a foreign entity being able to have total control over your registration, is really an advantage. That makes Colombia a very business friendly country, and Colombia with Mexico, with Chile, and Costa Rica now are OECD countries. So they're adopting world-class policies to attract business. So Colombia is leading this in the regulatory framework. So yeah, that
Okay,
helps a lot.
excellent.
Yeah. So so what are your plans with Saranas, James? I mean, how do you see Latin America playing a role in your company, in your future? Do you
So
have any
we're,
markets in mind? Any next steps in Latin America in mind?
yeah, I mean, our initial focus certainly is getting U.S. traction,
Okay.
getting this enrollment into our clinical trial, which will be a 260 patient trial to demonstrate a reduction in bleed complications when our product is used versus not. And we'll compare that to existing published data that's out there. With regards to commercialization, would be we're hiring the team up here for US, but we'll also start looking to external markets. The company never did anything outside of US. Don't we? We're going to start from ground zero
Sure.
with the CE
Mhm.
mark.
Makes sense.
So
Mhm.
we've got to go after. But what I am looking at is what can we do in countries like Latin America, even countries regions like Middle East,
Mhm.
or countries in Latin America and Middle East that have sort of the criteria that I want, which is, what's the status of the license holder? Call it
Yes.
that.
Mhm.
What's the size of market? There's
Sure.
obviously
Yeah.
the ability to sell into that market, public, private. What was the process? Not just for approval, but what's the financial side of
The reimbursement
reimbursement?
status and all that.
So there's kind of a extensive checklist that I operate off of. So but we probably won't start looking to Latin America until next year and more likely second half.
Yeah. Okay.
But at that time will be because ideally what I want is somebody dedicated inside Saranas to manage
To
that.
manage it.
Um,
Yes, that's the right
right
thing to
now I'm
do.
the only
Agree.
right
Yeah.
now I'm the only one,
Yeah.
and
Of course. Yeah.
I'm not prioritizing, Latin America.
Yeah.
However, I do think the countries that you just listed earlier, Mexico, Colombia,
Chile,
Chile,
Costa Rica.
certainly,
Hmm.
and then if Brazil's obviously a great and large market, great country. It's just it's a regulatory
Yeah. Yeah.
behemoth, so it's pretty pretty much a barrier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Agree. Great. Yeah. Excellent, James. So it looks like that Latin America is in your radar. That's what I wanted to hear, and that's what I
Yep.
wanted listeners to hear directly from you. That you
Yep. And I
certainly
definitely have a lot of friends, obviously, particularly Mexico, but having worked in the entire region and reported to Argentina while I was in Mexico, certainly have a lot of friends
okay.
and old colleagues that are. In fact, I think a good friend, Carlos Flores, is in Colombia,
Really?
or he is Colombian. I think he's
Okay.
got a business going in Colombia.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Very good. Very good.
he reached out to me recently. So
Excellent. Excellent. And Juan, Juan Munoz, your good friend too, in Colombia.
oh yes, of course.
All right, James. It's been a
Yeah.
delightful conversation, and we're close to the end of the show. Any final words of wisdom? What would you say to the CEO of newer medical device company that is just starting to look at Latin America as a place to do business trials or commercialization? What would be your final words to him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's plenty of opportunity. There's plenty of reason to want to have activities in Latin America, be it clinical study. Certainly, the first in man opportunity is presented itself as being real. Uh, the commercial opportunities are certainly there, and one that we're going to pursue for sure. But then, finally, is as you get larger and wanting to do this offshore, near shore, as you said, manufacturing, there's an industry there, and it's not even burgeoning. It's there. I mean, it exists. So it would be one for all those opportunities exist for certainly medical device companies. Um, and then something I've always looked at. So people said, "Oh, you did multiple expat assignments. You were pretty successful at each of them, which led to the next one and the next one." And somebody asked me how did you approach it? I said, "Well, look, I believe that um, you know everyone in the world is pretty much the same. Maybe 80%, and I'll just make up a number. Say 80% the same. It's that other 20% that is really different." And that's what is the shiny toy that everyone focuses on, and that's what you absolutely need to ignore. It doesn't matter. Stay where the commonality exists. You want to do well in your job. You want to be recognized for that success. You want to provide for your families. All those things, intangibles that don't separate us. You need to focus on. Ignore
I
the
love it.
differences.
Nice
Yeah.
words. Good thinking. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
wisdom. James, it's been again a fascinating conversation. I learn so much every time I speak with somebody of your caliber, with somebody of your experience, and I can't thank you enough for being in the show today. And I'm sure listeners have learned a lot from you, from your words, from your wisdom, from your experience.
It was a pleasure, Julio. I enjoyed it, and thanks for the invitation. And look forward to working with you.
Beautiful. Bye, James.
Okay. All right. Take
Bye.